Lila's trembling hand clutched Ava's as they stepped into the CEO's towering office, unaware that one small voice would unravel a heart hardened by grief. "Mr. CEO, will you be my daddy?" Have you ever felt like you were carrying the weight of the world, yet had to keep going for someone you love? Share your thoughts in the comments. The morning sun barely pierced the haze of Lila's cramped apartment, where dishes teetered in the sink and a faded resume lay crumpled on the table. Lila, 32, adjusted her too-tight blazer, her fingers trembling as she smoothed Ava's pigtails. Her daughter, 6, clutched a worn teddy bear, its button eyes glinting with the same stubborn hope Lila fought to hold on to. Today was her last shot, a job interview at Pinnacle Tech, the kind of place where dreams went to either soar or die. Lila's stomach churned. "You're not enough," whispered the voice that had haunted her since David left, abandoning her pregnant and penniless. She glanced at Ava, coloring on the floor, oblivious to the eviction notice tucked under a stack of bills. No babysitter. No choice. Lila sighed, grabbing Ava's hand. "We're going on an adventure, sweetheart." Across the city, in a glass tower that sliced the skyline, James Harper, 45, stared at a photo on his desk, a girl with pigtails, frozen in time. His daughter, Emily, gone 7 years now. The office was silent, save for the hum of ambition, his empire, built to bury the pain. His suit was crisp, his expression colder. He'd interview a dozen candidates today, none likely to meet his exacting standards. His assistant knocked. "Lila Bennett's here, sir." She brought her daughter. James's jaw tightened. Unprofessional. He waved them in, already dismissing her. But as the door opened, Ava's tiny sneakers squeaked, and something in James stirred, unbidden, like a memory he couldn't outrun. Lila's heart raced as she stepped into the office, Ava's hand sticky in hers. The room was a cathedral of wealth, polished wood, city views, air thick with power. James's eyes, sharp and gray, pinned her like a specimen. "Ms. Bennett," he said, voice clipped, "this is a workplace, not a daycare." Lila flushed, her throat tight. "I'm sorry, sir. I couldn't find a sitter." Ava, undaunted, tugged her hand, staring at James. "Your office is shiny," she chirped. Lila's cheeks burned, but James's lips twitched, almost a smile, before he caught himself. He gestured to a chair. "Let's make this quick." Lila sat, her resume trembling in her hands. She'd prepped for days, memorizing tech jargon, but now her mind blanked. Ava fidgeted, humming softly, her crayons spilling across the table. Lila's voice cracked as she spoke about her coding skills, each word feeling like a plea. "Don't mess this up." She'd been a promising programmer once, before David's betrayal left her scraping by on freelance gigs. Now, every rejection letter felt like proof she'd never climb out. She glanced at Ava, whose wide eyes took in the room like it was a castle. For her, Lila would keep trying. James watched, his pen tapping rhythmically. He'd built Pinnacle from nothing, a fortress against the chaos of loss. Emily's accident had shattered him, his fault, he believed, for working late that night. He'd vowed never to feel that pain again. Candidates like Lila, with their messy lives, were distractions. Yet Ava's humming, soft and unguarded, echoed Emily's. He pushed the thought away, focusing on Lila's resume. Gaps. Inconsistencies. But her eyes, fierce, tired, held something he couldn't name. "Why Pinnacle?" he asked, testing her. Lila swallowed. "Because I need to build a future for my daughter." Her honesty disarmed him, just for a moment. The interview stumbled on, Lila's answers shaky but earnest. Ava drew quietly, her crayons scratching out a rainbow. James's questions grew sharper, probing her skills, her resolve. Lila met his gaze, refusing to crumble. She wasn't just fighting for a job, she was fighting for Ava, for a life beyond survival. As the hour ended, Ava looked up, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Are you nice, Mr. CEO?" James froze, the question landing like a stone in still water. Lila's heart sank, but their paths were now entwined, whether they knew it or not. The air in James's office thickened, the hum of the city beyond the glass muted by Ava's small, clear voice. "Are you nice, Mr. CEO?" she'd asked, and now her wide hazel eyes locked onto James, unblinking, expectant. Lila's heart plummeted, her palms slick against the arms of the chair. She wanted to scoop Ava up, bolt from the room, and erase this disaster. Ava, honey, sure, she whispered, her voice tight with panic. But Ava, oblivious to the stakes, tilted her head, her pigtails swaying. You look like you could be a daddy, she said, softer now, almost a question. Will you be my daddy? The words hit like a thunderclap. Lila's breath caught, her face burning as if Ava had spilled a shameful secret. She stammered, I'm so sorry, Mr. Harper, she doesn't mean. But her voice faltered under James's gaze, no longer sharp but distant, as if he'd been pulled somewhere else entirely. His pen, mid-tap, froze, hovering over the notepad. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in with the weight of Ava's question. Lila's mind raced. She's ruined it, we're done, no job, no future. But she couldn't look away from James. His eyes, gray and stormy, flickered with something raw, unguarded, like a wound torn open. James barely heard Lila's apology. Ava's voice echoed in his skull, each syllable a shard of glass. Will you be my daddy? He saw Emily's face, pigtails, gap-toothed grin, sitting in his old office, asking him to play before he'd brushed her off for a call. The memory burned, sharp as the screech of tires from that night. His throat tightened, the scent of Ava's crayons, waxy sweet, pulling him back to Emily's drawings, scattered across his desk years ago. He blinked, forcing himself to focus, but Ava's small hand rested on the table, clutching a blue crayon, and it was too much. Too close. Lila watched him, her pulse hammering. She expected anger, dismissal, but James's silence was worse. His face, usually a mask of control, twitched, lips parting, then closing. She gripped Ava's shoulder, ready to flee, but Ava leaned forward, undeterred. My mommy says daddies are strong and kind. Are you kind? Lila's chest ached. She wanted to scream at Ava to stop, but the truth in her daughter's words pinned her. David hadn't been kind. He'd left them, left her to question every choice, every failure. She braced for James to end the interview, to confirm she didn't belong here. James cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet. Ms. Bennett, he said, his voice low, almost strained, your daughter's imaginative. He meant to sound detached, but the words came out uneven. He glanced at Ava, her drawing now a messy swirl of colors, and something in him cracked. Not enough to break, but enough to ache. Let's continue, he said, flipping a page in his notes, but his hand trembled slightly, betraying him. Lila nodded, her mouth dry, unsure if this was mercy or a trap. She launched into her next answer, her voice steadier now, fueled by desperation to salvage this. Ava, sensing the shift, went back to her drawing, humming softly. The sound filled the room, a fragile thread weaving through the tension. Lila spoke about her coding projects, her words careful but earnest, each one a plea for a chance. James listened, or tried to, but his eyes kept drifting to Ava. Her tiny fingers smudged blue across the paper, and he saw Emily again, her laughter echoing in a park, her hand in his before everything changed. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to ask another question. What's your experience with scalable systems? He said, sharper than intended. Lila flinched but answered, her voice a lifeline she refused to let snap. The interview stretched on, but Ava's question lingered like a pulse. Lila felt it in every pause, every glance James threw her way, less cold now but heavier, as if he were seeing her for the first time. She didn't know what it meant, only that something had shifted, like a door creaking open. Ava, unaware of the storm she'd stirred, smiled at her drawing, holding it up. Look, Mommy, it's us. Lila's heart twisted at the sketch. 2 stick figures, a woman and a girl, holding hands under a bright sun. No father. Just them. Always them. James's eyes caught the drawing, and his breath hitched. He turned away, staring out the window, the city a blur of steel and light. Lila's voice faded to background noise. Will you be my daddy? The question wasn't just Ava's, it was a challenge, a mirror, reflecting everything he'd buried. He didn't answer. Ava couldn't. But as Lila spoke, her voice soft but fierce, he felt something stir. Not love, not yet, but a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe. Or fear. Ava's question changed everything. Have you ever had a moment that shifted your perspective in an instant? Share below and let's talk about those life-changing sparks. Lila's voice trembled as she finished her answer, the words about database optimization feeling hollow after Ava's bombshell. Her hands twisted in her lap, the weight of her daughter's question, will you be my daddy, still hanging in the air like smoke. She forced a smile, glancing at Ava, who was now stacking crayons into a wobbly tower, oblivious to the chaos she'd unleashed. Lila's chest tightened. She'd come here for a job, not to expose her deepest wounds. "I'm so sorry about that, Mr. Harper," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. She doesn't understand." Her words felt like a plea, not just for forgiveness, but for a chance to be seen as more than a desperate mother. James nodded curtly, his pen scratching notes, but his mind was elsewhere. Ava's question had ripped open a scar he'd spent years sealing shut. Emily's laughter, her tiny hand in his, flashed behind his eyes, and he gripped the pen harder to anchor himself. "It's fine," he said, his tone clipped, betraying none of the storm inside. He needed to focus, on the interview, on Pinnacle, on anything but the ache Ava's words had stirred. "Let's move on. Tell me about your experience with cloud integration." His voice was professional, but his eyes flicked to Ava, then away, as if looking too long might unravel him completely. Lila swallowed, nodding, but her thoughts spiraled. Ava's question wasn't just childish whimsy, it was a knife, cutting into the life she'd tried to build alone. David's abandonment had left her doubting everything: her worth, her strength, her ability to give Ava a father. She told herself it didn't matter, that they were enough, but Ava's longing for a daddy proved otherwise. Lila's throat burned as she answered James's question, her voice mechanical, each word a shield against the shame bubbling inside. She couldn't lose this job, not now, not when rent was overdue and Ava's shoes were too small. But how could she recover from this? James listened, or tried to, but his focus splintered. Lila's answers were competent, but her voice, soft, steady despite her nerves, kept pulling him back to Ava. He saw Emily in her, in the way she tilted her head, the way her crayons smelled of wax and innocence. He wanted to dismiss it, to call it a trick of grief, but the memory clung like damp cloth. He straightened, forcing his gaze to Lila's resume. Gaps. Freelance work. Nothing extraordinary. Yet her determination, the way she held herself under pressure, gnawed at him. She wasn't just another candidate. Not anymore. "You're not what I expected," he said abruptly, cutting her off mid-sentence. Lila froze, her heart sinking. "I mean," he added softer, "you're resilient." The word slipped out, surprising him. He hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant to let her see anything but his usual detachment. Lila blinked, unsure if it was a compliment or a critique. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice small but steady. She glanced at Ava, who was now humming a tune, her crayon tower toppling. Lila's resolve hardened. She couldn't let this moment define her failure. The interview continued, but tension coiled tighter. James's questions grew sharper, as if testing her limits, while Lila's answers grew fiercer, fueled by a need to prove herself. Yet both were running from Ava's question. Lila told herself it was nothing, just a child's fantasy, but her heart whispered otherwise. Ava needs more than I can give. James buried himself in technical details, but his eyes betrayed him, drifting to Ava's drawings, to the smudge of blue on her fingers. He saw Emily's art supplies, scattered in a hospital room, untouched after the crash. He cleared his throat, pushing the memory down. A knock at the door broke the rhythm. James's assistant, Claire, poked her head in. "Sir, the board's waiting for your input on the merger." James's jaw tightened. Duty called, always pulling him away. He glanced at Lila, then Ava, and something twisted in his chest. "We'll wrap this up soon," he said, his voice colder than he meant. Lila nodded, her stomach knotting. She felt the clock ticking, on the interview, on her chance, on her fragile hope. Ava looked up, smiling at James. "You're busy, huh?" she said, innocent but piercing. James didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than words. Lila gathered her things as the interview ended, her hands shaking. She wanted to believe she'd done enough, but Ava's question had changed the air, made everything too personal. She thanked James, her voice formal, but her eyes searched his for a sign, any sign, that she hadn't ruined everything. James stood, offering a stiff nod. "We'll be in touch," he said, but his gaze lingered on Ava, who waved at him, clutching her teddy bear. Lila led her out, the weight of uncertainty crushing her. James watched them go, alone again, the echo of Ava's voice refusing to fade. Lila's sneakers squeaked on the polished marble as she led Ava toward the elevator, her mind replaying the interview's jagged edges. "We'll be in touch," James had said, but his tone felt like a door slamming. She gripped Ava's hand, her heart heavy with the familiar sting of failure. The elevator doors were in sight when Claire, James's assistant, hurried after them. "Ms. Bennett, wait," she called, her voice sharp with urgency. "There's been a mix-up. The next candidate isn't here for another 2 hours. Mr. Harper needs you to stay, to discuss further." Lila froze, her pulse spiking. "Further?" she asked, her voice barely hiding her disbelief. Claire nodded, glancing at Ava, who was twirling a crayon between her fingers. "He's tied up with the board, but he insisted." Lila's stomach twisted, part hope, part dread. Was this a second chance or a prolonged rejection? She looked at Ava, whose wide eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Can we stay, Mommy?" Ava asked, tugging her hand. Lila sighed, nodding. "Okay, sweetheart. But you have to be good." They followed Claire back to James's office, the air thick with uncertainty. Inside, the office felt larger, colder, with James absent. Claire pointed to a sleek leather couch. "Make yourselves comfortable. He'll be back soon." Lila sat, her blazer creasing, and pulled Ava close. The room smelled of polished wood and coffee, a world so far from her cluttered apartment. Ava wiggled free, exploring the desk, her tiny fingers brushing a framed photo. James's daughter, Lila assumed, her heart panging at the resemblance to Ava. She wanted to ask, but the silence felt too fragile to break. James, meanwhile, sat in the boardroom, his mind only half on the merger discussion. Charts and projections blurred as Ava's voice echoed, "Will you be my daddy?" He clenched his fist under the table, Emily's face flashing in his mind, her pigtails, her giggle, gone in a screech of metal. He'd buried himself in work to escape, but Lila's quiet strength and Ava's unguarded hope had cracked something open. He glanced at his watch. 2 hours until the next candidate. He'd told Claire to keep Lila there, though he wasn't sure why. Not yet. When he returned, Lila stood quickly, smoothing her skirt, her eyes wary. "Mr. Harper, I didn't expect," she started, but he waved her off, his expression softer than before. "There's time," he said, his voice low. "Let's talk." Ava, perched on the couch, waved her drawing. "I made a castle," she chirped. James's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through. "It's a good castle," he said, surprising himself. Lila watched, her guard still up, but something in his tone, gentle, almost warm, eased her. Claire suggested lunch in the company cafeteria, a sleek space buzzing with employees. "It's on us," she said, handing Lila a tray. Lila hesitated, then nodded, grateful but uneasy. They sat at a corner table, Ava's chatter filling the silence. "This place is like a spaceship," she said, dipping a fry in ketchup. Lila smiled, but her eyes kept darting to James, who sat across from them, his tie loosened. He wasn't eating, just watching Ava with a look Lila couldn't read, pain maybe or longing. "Do you come here a lot?" Lila asked, breaking the silence, her voice tentative. James blinked, as if pulled from a trance. "Not really," he said. "Too busy." His words were short, but his gaze lingered on Ava, who was now drawing on a napkin. "She's full of life," he added, almost to himself. Lila's chest tightened. "She is," she said softly. "She's my everything." The admission slipped out, raw and unguarded, and James met her eyes, something unspoken passing between them. Ava, oblivious, reached across the table, offering James a fry. "Want one?" she asked, her smile bright. He hesitated, then took it, his fingers brushing hers. "Thanks," he said, his voice catching. Lila watched, her heart stirring. This man, so cold before, was softening, and she didn't know why. She wanted to pull back, to protect herself and Ava, but the moment felt like a bridge, one she wasn't sure she could cross. As they ate, Ava's laughter echoed, drawing curious glances from employees. James noticed, his jaw tightening, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he asked Lila about her coding projects, his questions less probing, more curious. She answered, her confidence growing, but her mind kept circling back to Ava's question. It had changed something, made this man less a CEO and more human. She didn't trust it, not yet, but the warmth in her chest was undeniable. The lunch stretched on, the cafeteria's clatter fading into background noise. Ava drew a picture of the three of them, stick figures under a lopsided sun, and slid it toward James. "For you," she said. He stared at it, his throat bobbing, and Lila saw it again, that flicker of pain, now mixed with something softer. She didn't know his story, but she felt it, heavy and real. For the first time, she wondered if they were more alike than different. Lila's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, the cafeteria's hum fading as she watched James study Ava's drawing. The stick figures, her, Ava, and him under a lopsided sun, seemed to hold him captive, his gray eyes tracing the lines with an intensity that made her uneasy. She wanted to speak, to fill the silence, but something in his stillness stopped her. Ava, oblivious, munched on her fries, humming a tune that felt too bright for the weight settling over the table. Lila's heart thudded. This moment, this strange connection, felt like a thread she could either pull or cut. James's thumb brushed the edge of the napkin, where Ava had drawn a tiny heart beside his stick figure. The gesture, so small, sliced through him. He saw Emily's drawings again, crayon flowers, lopsided stars, taped to his fridge before the accident. He'd kept one in his wallet, faded now, but the same heart-shaped flourish stared up at him from Ava's napkin. His chest tightened, the memory crashing in, Emily's laughter in the car, the radio blaring, then the screech of tires. He'd been working late, always working, and hadn't been there to drive her. The guilt had built his empire, brick by brick, to keep that night at bay. He set the napkin down, his hand unsteady. Lila noticed, her instincts sharpening. "Mr. Harper, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft but probing. He met her gaze, and for a moment, she saw it, grief raw and unguarded, flickering in his eyes. He shook his head, a faint smile masking the pain. "It's just, her drawing reminds me of someone." His voice was low, almost a whisper, and Lila's breath caught. She glanced at the framed photo on his desk, visible through the office door, and a pieces clicked. The girl in the photo, pigtails like Ava's. A daughter. His daughter. Who was she? Lila asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. James stiffened, his jaw tightening, but something in Lila's eyes, gentle not judgmental, loosened the knot inside him. He leaned back, exhaling. "Emily," he said, the name heavy. "My daughter. She passed away 7 years ago." The words hung between them, stark and final. Lila's heart sank, her own pain echoing his. She thought of David, the man who'd walked away when she told him about Ava, leaving her to face motherhood alone. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I know what it's like to lose someone." James's eyes flicked to her, curious despite himself. "You do?" he asked, his tone softer now, less guarded. Lila hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. She hadn't meant to share, but the moment felt like a door half open. "Ava's father," she said quietly. "He left when I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready. I've been on my own ever since." Her voice wavered, but she held his gaze, refusing to hide. "It's hard, wondering if you're enough for your kid. If you'll ever be enough." The confession landed like a stone in still water, rippling through James. He saw Lila differently now, not just a candidate, but a woman carrying the same kind of weight he did. He wanted to say something to bridge the gap, but Ava interrupted, climbing onto Lila's lap. "Mommy, tell the story about the park," she chirped, her eyes bright. Lila smiled, though her throat tightened. "Not now, sweetie," she said, brushing Ava's hair back. But James leaned forward, surprising himself. "I'd like to hear it," he said, his voice gentle. Lila blinked, caught off guard, then nodded. "It's nothing special," she began, her voice softening. "When Ava was 3, we'd go to this little park near our old place. She'd chase pigeons, fall in the dirt, laugh like it was the best day ever. I'd watch her, wondering how I got so lucky, even when everything else felt broken." Her eyes glistened, and she looked down, embarrassed. James felt a pang, picturing Emily at that age, her giggles filling a playground. "That sounds perfect," he said, his voice rough. Ava, sensing the shift, slid off Lila's lap and tugged James's sleeve. "Did your little girl like parks?" she asked, innocent but piercing. James froze, his breath catching. Lila tensed, ready to intervene, but James answered, his voice barely audible. "She loved them. Especially the swings." Ava beamed. "I love swings too." The connection, small but real, hung between them, fragile and heavy. Lila watched James, her heart stirring. His pain mirrored hers, but so did his love for a child. She wanted to pull back, to protect herself, but the mystery of their shared wounds kept her there. James, too, felt the pull, a need to know more, to understand this woman who carried her scars with such quiet strength. The napkin, still on the table, seemed to pulse with meaning, a bridge between their pasts and this moment. The cafeteria's clatter softened as the lunch crowd thinned, leaving Lila, Ava, and James in their corner, the napkin drawing still resting between them. The air felt lighter, as if their shared confessions had lifted a veil. Lila sipped her coffee, its warmth grounding her, while Ava swung her legs under the table, humming a tune that danced like sunlight. James, his tie still loosened, leaned forward, his usual sharpness dulled by something softer. He looked at Ava, then Lila, and for the first time, Lila felt he wasn't judging her. "Swings, huh?" Lila said, picking up where Ava's question about parks had left off. Her voice was tentative, testing the fragile bridge between them. James nodded, his eyes distant but warm. Emily would beg for one more push every time. He paused, his fingers tracing the edge of the napkin. "I'd give in, always." His voice held a quiet ache, and Lila felt it echo her own, moments with Ava she clung to, knowing they'd slip away too fast. Ava, sensing a game, bounced in her seat. "Can you make a paper bird?" she asked James, her eyes wide with expectation. Lila started to hush her, but James raised a hand, a faint smile breaking through. "I can try," he said, pulling a clean napkin from the tray. He folded it carefully, his fingers steady but deliberate, as if the act were a ritual. Lila watched, her breath catching at the care in his movements. The napkin took shape, a crane, its edges crisp and delicate. "Wow!" Ava clapped, reaching for it. James handed it to her, his hand lingering as their fingers brushed. "My daughter taught me that," he said, his voice low, almost a confession. Lila's heart tugged. She saw the man behind the CEO now, a father, broken but still holding on to love. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning more than the crane. James met her gaze, and for a moment, the world shrank to just them, the hum of the cafeteria fading. Ava, clutching the crane, grinned. "Mommy, tell Mr. James about our kite day." Lila laughed, the sound surprising her. "Oh, Ava, he doesn't want to hear that." But James leaned closer, his elbow on the table. "I do," he said, his tone earnest. Lila hesitated, then let herself fall into the memory. "Last spring, we made this awful kite, string, tape, a plastic bag. It crashed every 5 seconds, but Ava laughed so hard she fell over." Ava giggled, mimicking the fall, and James chuckled, a sound so rare it warmed the air. "You should have seen her," Lila continued, her voice softening. "Covered in grass, shouting at the sky like it could hear her." She looked at Ava, her heart swelling, then at James, who was watching her with something like wonder. "Those moments, they're what keep me going." Her honesty hung there unguarded, and James nodded, as if he understood too well. "I get that," he said quietly. Emily had this laugh. It could stop time. The table felt like a small island, their stories weaving a fragile bond. Ava, bored of sitting, slid off her chair and tugged James's sleeve. "Come draw with me," she said, pulling him toward a nearby whiteboard meant for brainstorming. Lila started to protest, but James stood, letting Ava lead him. "All right, kiddo," he said, grabbing a marker. He sketched a lopsided tree, Ava adding squiggly leaves, their laughter mingling. Lila watched, her chest tight with something new, hope, maybe, or the possibility of being seen. For a moment, it felt like healing. James's usual walls were down, his laughter genuine as Ava bossed him around. Lila felt her own guard slip, her self-doubt quieting. She joined them, adding a sun to the whiteboard, her hand brushing James's as they reached for the same marker. The touch was brief, electric, and their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of the shift between them. "You're good with her," Lila said, her voice soft. James shrugged, but his smile lingered. "She makes it easy." The moment wasn't permanent, Lila knew that. The interview, the job, the weight of their pasts still loomed. But as Ava drew a heart around their tree, Lila felt a flicker of peace, like a promise of something more. James felt it too, though he didn't name it. He looked at Lila, her eyes warm and fierce, and wondered if this was what it felt like to come alive again. What's a moment when laughter or a small act of kindness built a bridge between you and someone else? Share below, we'd love to hear how it changed you. The whiteboard in the cafeteria, now a mess of Ava's squiggly leaves and Lila's lopsided sun, stood as a testament to the fragile warmth they'd built. Lila's laughter faded as she caught James's eye, his smile lingering like a shared secret. Ava, marker in hand, added a final heart, oblivious to the shift in the air. But the moment cracked when Claire hurried over, her heels clicking sharply. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice tight, "the board's reconvening. They need you now." James's face hardened, the CEO mask slipping back on. Lila's stomach sank. The bubble had burst. As James stood, a tall man in a crisp suit approached, his expression stern. "James," he said, glancing at Lila and Ava with thinly veiled disdain, "is this the candidate you're wasting time on? Bringing a child to an interview?" His tone dripped with judgment. Lila froze, her cheeks burning. The man, Richard, a board member, she'd later learn, continued. "We're discussing a multi-million-dollar merger, and you're playing house?" Lila's heart pounded, shame flooding her. She gripped Ava's hand, ready to flee, but James's voice cut through, sharp and low. "She's qualified, Richard. Back off." Lila's eyes flicked to James, surprised by his defense, but the tension only grew. Richard scoffed. "Qualified? This is Pinnacle, not a charity." His words hit Lila like a slap, echoing every doubt she'd carried since David left. She wasn't enough, not for this job, not for Ava, not for this gleaming world of glass and power. She stood, pulling Ava close. "We should go," she said, her voice trembling but firm. James turned to her, his eyes flashing. "You don't have to." "You don't get it," Lila snapped, her voice louder than she meant. "I'm not some pity case. I came here to work, not to be judged or humored." Her words spilled out, raw and jagged, fueled by years of rejection. She thought of the laughter, the crane, the whiteboard, moments that felt real but now seemed like a cruel tease. "Ava, and I don't need your charity, Mr. Harper." Ava looked up, confused, clutching her paper crane. "Mommy," she whispered, but Lila was already moving, her bag slung over her shoulder. James's jaw tightened, his own walls rising. "I wasn't offering charity," he said, his voice cold but cracking. "I thought you were different." The word stung, implying she'd misread him, that her fear had twisted their connection into something it wasn't. He felt the sting of her accusation. Pity? He defended her, let her in, only to be pushed away. Emily's loss roared back, whispering he'd never be enough either, not for his daughter, not for anyone. He turned to Richard. "I'll be there in 5, he said, dismissing him, but his eyes stayed on Lila, pleading for her to stay. Lila didn't see it. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She led Ava toward the exit, the cafeteria's chatter now a dull roar. "We're fine, Ava," she whispered, more to herself than her daughter. But her heart screamed otherwise. She'd felt something with James, a spark of understanding, of possibility, but Richard's words had shattered it, confirming her deepest fear: she didn't belong here. Ava's small hand squeezed hers. "Is Mr. James mad?" she asked, her voice small. Lila shook her head, unable to answer, her throat tight with regret. James watched them go, his chest heavy. He wanted to call after her, to explain, but pride held him back. He saw Emily in Ava's retreating figure, her pigtails bouncing, and the ache was unbearable. He'd let Lila in, let himself feel, only to have it thrown back in his face. He stormed back to his office, slamming the door, the paper crane on his desk mocking him. He was alone again, the way he'd always been since Emily. Maybe that was how it should stay. Lila reached the elevator, her breath ragged. She'd snapped at James, but it wasn't just him, it was every rejection, every closed door, every night she'd cried herself to sleep wondering if Ava deserved better. She pressed the button, her hand shaking. Ava hugged her leg, the crane still in her hand. "I liked him," she said softly. Lila's heart broke. She'd ruined it, not just the job, but something deeper, something she couldn't name. As the elevator doors closed, she wondered if she'd ever stop running from hope. Lila sat on the edge of her sagging couch, the apartment's dim light casting shadows on the eviction notice crumpled beside her. Ava slept in the next room, her paper crane tucked under her pillow, its edges already fraying. Lila's hands trembled as she stared at her phone, the screen blank, no call, no email from Pinnacle. She'd stormed out of James's office hours ago, her words to him, "I'm not some pity case," echoing like a wound she'd inflicted on herself. Her chest ached with regret, not just for the job but for the fleeting warmth she'd felt with him, now shattered by her own fear. She wanted to call, to apologize, but pride held her back. What if he'd only seen her as a charity case, a struggling mom to pity? Yet Ava's voice, "I liked him," gnawed at her, a reminder of the hope she'd almost grasped. She stood, pacing the small living room, her footsteps muffled by the worn rug. The memory of James's eyes, soft when he'd folded the crane, haunted her. He'd defended her to Richard, hadn't he? But her outburst had burned that bridge. She thought of Ava, who deserved more than a mother who ran from chances. Lila's fingers hovered over her phone, her heart pounding. She could email him, say something, anything, to fix this. But what if he rejected her? The thought made her stomach lurch, but Ava's laughter from the cafeteria, James's faint smile, pushed her forward. She opened her laptop, her hands shaking as she typed a subject line, "Thank you for today." Across town, James sat alone in his office, the city's lights glittering beyond the glass. The paper crane sat on his desk, its delicate folds a stark contrast to the sterile order around him. He hadn't gone back to the board meeting after Lila left. Richard's words, "playing house," had cut, but Lila's accusation stung deeper. Charity. He'd never pitied her. He'd seen her strength, her fire, and it had stirred something he hadn't felt since Emily. But her anger, her assumption, had slammed a door he'd barely opened. He leaned back, his eyes on the crane, remembering Emily's hands folding one just like it. He'd failed her, hadn't he? Maybe he'd fail Lila and Ava too. His phone buzzed, Claire, reminding him of tomorrow's schedule. He ignored it, his gaze drifting to the napkin drawing Ava had left behind, tucked in his drawer. The stick figures, the heart, the sun, they felt like a life he'd lost, or maybe one he could still find. He rubbed his temples, the weight of his solitude crushing. He could let Lila go, keep his walls up, stay safe. But the memory of Ava's giggle, Lila's quiet confession about the park, pulled at him. He grabbed his phone, hesitating, then opened a new voicemail. "Ms. Bennett," he started, his voice rough, I'm sorry for today. You're not a pity case. You're remarkable. The job's yours, if you want it. Please call me." He hit send, his heart racing, then set the phone down, staring at the crane. It was a risk, reaching out, letting himself care. But the alternative, silence, emptiness, was worse. He waited, the seconds stretching, wondering if she'd respond or if he'd pushed her too far. Lila's laptop pinged as she drafted her email, her words halting but honest. "I shouldn't have snapped. You gave us a chance, and I was scared." She paused, her cursor blinking, when her phone lit up, a voicemail from James. Her breath caught. She played it, his voice filling the quiet room, each word heavy with sincerity. "You're remarkable." Her eyes stung, the weight of her fear lifting slightly. Ava stirred in the next room, murmuring in her sleep, and Lila's resolve hardened. She thought of the crane, the whiteboard, the moments that felt like family. She could stay proud, stay safe, or she could choose hope. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over James's number. Her heart pounded, but Ava's trust, her own longing for connection, pushed her forward. She hit call, the ring loud in the silence. When James answered, his voice tentative, "Lila." She took a breath, ready to risk it all. "Mr. Harper," she said softly, "I'd like to talk." Lila stood outside Pinnacle Tech's glass tower, the morning sun glinting off its sleek facade. Her new blazer fit better than the old one, but her nerves still buzzed as she gripped Ava's hand. It had been a week since her late-night call with James, a conversation that stretched past midnight, their voices tentative but honest. She'd accepted the job, but more than that, she'd agreed to meet again to talk, not as candidate and CEO, but as two people who'd seen each other's scars. Ava, clutching her paper crane, looked up at the building. "Is Mr. James here?" she asked, her voice bright with hope. Lila smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "He is, sweetheart." Inside, James waited in his office, the paper crane now a fixture on his desk beside Emily's photo. He'd spent the week replaying their call, Lila's quiet apology, her story of resilience, the way she'd laughed when he admitted he hadn't folded a crane in years. He'd offered her the job, but the real risk was what came next, letting her and Ava into his life, even just a little. His fingers brushed the crane's delicate folds, a reminder of Emily but also of something new. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, his voice steadier than he felt. Lila stepped inside, Ava at her side, her resume replaced by a notebook for her first day. The office felt different now, less cold, more like a place where something could grow. James stood, his suit impeccable but his smile genuine. "Ms. Bennett," he said, then softer, "Lila. Welcome to Pinnacle." Ava waved, her crane flapping in her hand. "Hi, Mr. James," she chirped, and James's heart tugged. The echo of "Will you be my daddy?" Softer now, less a wound and more a possibility. Lila met his gaze, her eyes warm but cautious. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying layers. Gratitude for the job, for his apology, for the chance to start again. They'd talked about their pasts that night, her fear of never being enough, his guilt over Emily's accident. Neither had promised anything, but the honesty had felt like a beginning. "I brought something," Lila said, pulling a small paper crane from her bag, its edges slightly uneven. "Ava and I practiced." She handed it to him, her fingers brushing his, the touch brief but electric. James took it, his throat tight. "You're a quick learner," he said, his voice low, a smile tugging at his lips. Ava beamed, climbing onto a chair to inspect his desk. "Can I draw here again?" she asked, already reaching for a pen. Lila started to protest, now she laughed, and James joined in, the sound filling the room. "Go for it, kiddo," he said, sliding a notepad her way. Lila watched, her chest swelling. This wasn't love, not yet, but it was something close, trust, maybe, or the promise of it. They sat, talking over coffee as Ava scribbled. James asked about her first project, his tone professional but warm, while Lila shared ideas, her confidence growing. The conversation drifted, touching on small things, Ava's favorite park, James's old habit of stargazing with Emily. Each word felt like a step toward something new, a connection neither had expected. Lila glanced at the crane on his desk, then at hers in his hand, and the echo of Ava's question felt like a thread tying them together. "I was scared," Lila admitted, her voice soft as Ava drew. "After everything, I thought I'd ruined it." James nodded, his eyes steady. "I was too," he said. "I've been scared for years." The admission hung there, raw but freeing. He leaned forward, his voice quieter. "You and Ava. You reminded me what it feels like to care." Lila's eyes glistened, but she smiled. "You reminded me I'm more than my mistakes." Ava looked up, holding out her drawing, a new trio of stick figures, this time with James's crane in the sky. "It's us," she said, and Lila's heart caught. James took the drawing, his fingers trembling slightly. "It's perfect," he said, his voice thick. They weren't a family, not yet, but they were something, a beginning, a chance at love at last. As Lila and Ava left for her first day, James watched them go, the cranes on his desk a quiet promise of redemption, of hope, of a future neither had dared to dream. Word count, 1002. CTA, what's a moment when you found hope or love in an unexpected place? Drop your story below, we'd love to hear how it changed your life.